Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another Ask the Expert session with the Open University's Faculty of STEM. Today, we are bringing you a nutrition and health talk by Professor Hilary MacQueen. We are recording this session, so if you miss it or you have to pop out for any reason, it'll be available on both the OU STEM Facebook page and YouTube page. So without further ado, I will hand over to Hilary. Hilary?
Thank you, Katrina. Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us today. I'm Hilary MacQueen. I'm from the Department of Life, Health and Chemical Sciences in the Faculty of STEM, and I'm going to talk to you today about healthy eating and how we can eat to support both our gut and the microbes that live within it. So if I could have the first slide, please. I would like to there we are, good health and the gut, feeding yourself and your microbes. Okay, so on the next slide, there's a cartoon just to remind everybody about what the alimentary canal, the digestive system, looks like. So we start off at the top with the mouth, and we have tongue, salivary glands, teeth, all of which are essential to eating and chewing and swallowing. And once we've swallowed, the food goes down through the throat, through the esophagus, which is that long tube that connects the mouth to the top of the stomach. Now, the stomach is a very flexible and easily expandable bag, and it produces a lot of acid. And the acid that it produces denatures a lot of the food, helps to start breaking it down into small particles. And the stomach, being a very muscular bag, can also exercise a sort of churning action. And the churning plus the acid breaks down the food into a sort of a soupy mess, but a very nutritious soupy mess. Once it's got to the right consistency, the food will pass through the sphincter at the bottom of the stomach. A sphincter is a very tight muscle that holds everything together and can open and close, in this case involuntarily, but there are some sphincters that we can control, and we'll talk about those later on. When the food's left the stomach, it enters the small intestine, and at this point it gets bile and enzymes from the pancreas added to it. And those enzymes continue the breaking down of the food. So carbohydrates get broken down into simple sugars, fats get broken down into fatty acids and glycerol, and proteins get broken down into amino acids. So once all of those things have been added to the food coming from the stomach, it moves on through the small intestine, which is very long and consists of a long tube in loops. And that picture doesn't really do it justice, but because it doesn't show the huge size and length of the small intestine, but it is, excuse me, a very long tube indeed. Once the food is all digested, it moves from the bottom of the small intestine into the large intestine. And the large intestine goes up one side, across the middle and down the other side, and ends up in the rectum and the anus. And the anal sphincter is the one that we learn to control quite early on in life, and that's the one that regulates our bowel movements. So what this diagram doesn't show is a very large organ indeed, which is called the mesentery. And the mesentery is a sheet of connective tissue and many other component tissues that holds all the gut in place. So it maintains all the folding of the small intestine, it maintains the positioning of the colon, and it maintains the relative positions of stomach, liver, and pancreas. So it's a very important organ indeed, not least because it also houses a lot of blood vessels and the nervous system that works the gut, which is called the enteric nervous system. And we may come back to that later on. So that's a brief cartoon of what the digestive system looks like. And let's go on now to think about food. So on the next slide, we have the things that we do eat. So this slide, why do we eat? Well, the first answer obviously is because eating is nice, but the second answer is because we need all the components of food to make our bodies work properly. So from left to right on this slide, we've got the major food groups, which are carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. What are called micronutrients, because we need a lot less of them, and that's minerals and vitamins. And then right on the right-hand side, we've got water, which people often forget about, but actually water is hugely important. And we'll come back to that in a little while. So what do all these foodstuffs do? Well, the macronutrients, the carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, provide us with energy. And they are very effective at doing that. The body can break them down very easily to release lots of chemical energy, which can then be used for our own body processes. Fats and proteins and minerals are also very useful for growth and repair. And in fact, you need an awful lot of proteins in particular during growth, because an awful lot of the body size, the mass that we put on when we're growing, is proteinaceous in nature. So we've got muscles to build, we've got a skeleton to support, we've got all the other tissues, the nervous system and the adipose tissue and all of the rest of it, that all go together to make a healthy body. Now, the water and the vitamins and minerals, and to some extent the proteins, are also used to control body processes. Now, the proteins include a class of compounds called enzymes, which carry out all the reactions in the body. So they're incredibly important in making us work. Minerals include things like cofactors that help the enzymes work properly. And the whole of all body processes take place in a watery environment, which is why water is so important as part of our diet. Okay, on the next slide, we can see what the sort of recommended, this is a very dry slide, isn't it? It's what the recommended diet is. So rather more than half is carbohydrates. About a third, maybe a little bit less than a third, is fats, and the rest is protein. Now, when you look at that, you can see that we don't actually need as much protein as we sometimes think we do. The bulk of our diet really should come from carbohydrates. And although this slide is very dry, if we look at the next slide, we can see a picture that may be a bit more familiar to you, because this shows the sorts of foodstuffs that people eat. So the large circle in the middle is supposed to represent some kind of dinner plate, which is why it's used in this context. The green on the left-hand side is all the fruit and vegetables that we should be thinking about eating. And you can see that fruit and veg is actually a very large proportion of a healthy diet. The yellow on the other side of the plate is the complex carbohydrates that we've said should form a large part of our diet. So that's bread, potatoes, rice, pasta, that kind of thing. At the bottom of the plate, we've got a pink segment, which represents the proteins. And there again, you can see that we don't actually need as much protein as we do the other components of the diet. The blue segment is dairy products. So that's cheese, milk, that sort of thing, milk substitutes and vegan cheeses and that sort of thing. And the very, very narrow purple segment is the oils and spreads. So that's the pure fatty components of the diet. And you can see that the recommended amount is actually really pretty small. Now, at the top right-hand end of that bit there that the cursor is going around, that's the water. And really, you should be thinking about drinking 6 to 8 glasses of water, about 2 liters of water a day. On the top left is so that'll be familiar to people in the UK. That's what a food label looks like. And that's a nice, easy traffic light system of working out what foods are healthy and what are less healthy. So the green ones represent the amount of, well, they represent the good segments of food. So if you have a food label with a lot of green on, you can see that that's a relatively healthy food. If you have a food label that's got a lot of red on, then that's something to be very wary of, and don't eat too much of those. The orange ones are intermediate. They're not quite as good as the green ones, but they're better than the reds. So you should be looking at food labels in the context of really trying to maximize the green on the label. Now, finally on this slide, down at the bottom left-hand corner is the little bit of thing that people love so much. And this is things like crisps and chocolate and cakes and alcohol. And these are things that are not in the formal dinner plate because they really don't form a good part of the diet. But on the other hand, they are things that people tend to like very much. So it would be foolish to ignore them when you're thinking about diet. However, what you should do is not eat very much of them. Use them for special treats, not as a regular part of your diet. And finally, on this slide, what you need to try and do is maintain a balanced diet. So if you try to eat these food components in this sort of proportion, then that will be a balanced diet, which will be good for your health and also the health of your microbes, which we'll come on to shortly. So on the next slide, this is just to emphasize the importance of water. If we look at the arrows on the left-hand side, you can see all the water that goes into the digestive system. So we've got 1.5 liters of saliva, we've got 2 liters of gastric secretions, 1/2 liter of bile from the liver, 1.5 liters from the pancreas, and 1.5 liters of other stuff from the intestine. So if you count that up, that comes to 7 liters. This is per day, which we need to have a functioning digestive system. Now, on the right-hand side, you can see that some of this is absorbed back into the body again, so you're not losing all that water. But it does mean that you really have to give a good top-up to the digestive system every day as you're eating. And that's why at the top, when you're talking about 800 grams of food, which is approximately what a daily ration of food is likely to be, you've also got 2 liters of water coming in there as well. So that is just a slide to emphasize how important water is to a healthy gut and therefore a healthy body. Okay, let's look at the next slide. We're not alone. We've all got about 10 to the power of 12 cells in our bodies, and that's what we think of as human cells, and that's what makes us human. But we carry about 100 times that of microbes with us, mostly bacteria, largely in the gut, but not entirely in the gut. Our whole bodies are covered with bacteria, so skin, hair, all of us is covered in bacteria, and that's a good thing. I mean, it might sound a bit yucky, and you might think that when you have a bath or a shower, you wash them off, but you don't. They remain with us because they are actually a very important part of us as human beings. So we need both our own cells and our bacterial cells to be a healthy, functioning human being. And if anything goes wrong with either of those populations of cells, that's when you get illness and you get a less healthy state than you would like. So let's look on the next slide about the alimentary canal and the gut and the bacteria that live there. Now, these rather striking pictures are looking at dental plaque, and each of these colors is staining a different sort of bacterium. So you can see on the left-hand panel, these are forming what are called cauliflower-like colonies, and that's, you know, self-explanatory. They do look like the florets on cauliflower. Each color is a different sort of bacterium. So you can see that there's a whole community of bacteria in that lump of dental plaque. And there are very many sorts in there, all different colors, and some colors that don't differentiate terribly well on screen, but nevertheless, they're different sorts of bacteria. The right-hand panel is slightly simpler. This sort of structure is called corncob structures because if you can see from the green staining, these bacteria form into long chains that rather look like kernels on a corncob. And the purple strands are also bacterial. So these are making a very different sort of structure, but they're still all present on dental plaque. So that's just in our mouths. And so even when you brush your teeth, these bacteria remain. And that's why when you go to the hygienist, you have such a lot of pain as the hygienist chips away all the plaque. But they recolonize very quickly. And so that's why we get the sorts of lovely pictures, actually, that we do get. Now, on the next slide, we can look in a bit more detail about the bacteria in the colon. So on this left-hand panel, this slide was taken from a paper, so don't worry too much about what B and D mean. They're important in the context of the paper, but not for this discussion just now. The broadish blue band along the right-hand side, that is the wall of the colon. So you can see that it's very highly, it's called villus, which means that there are finger-like projections going into the lumen, which is the bit in the middle with all the brown stuff in. There's brown and green and yellow and some red, and all of those, like on the slide we saw before, are different sorts of bacteria. Now, if we look at the next slide, that's a slightly magnified and slightly different aspect. Again, the broad band this time around the left-hand side, that's the wall of the intestine. And on the inside, you can see not only the brown gunk that we saw in the first panel, but also you can see these sort of slices of blue cellular looking material. So those are actually, it's not intuitive because you'd think they'd be stained green, but those are parts of plants. Now, plants are very interesting. As we've seen, they should form a large part of our diet, but actually we can't digest plant cells. All the goodness in a plant is inside the plant cells, and we personally don't have a way of getting into those plant cells to release the contents that we can use for our own purposes. But luckily, we've got gut bacteria that can do that. They've got enzymes that can break down the cell wall of the cellulose, that's the plant stuff. And on the following slide is a blow up of, now I don't know, on my screen you can't actually see the important bit, but perhaps you can see it on your screen. There's a break in the cell wall of the plant. And through that break, you can see a flood of little yellow things, which are bacteria that have digested the blue cellulose cell wall and are going in to digest all the contents of the cell. And that's really important. That is one of the major reasons why gut bacteria are so useful to us, because they break down plant cells. Okay, so let's look on the next slide quickly and look at what our microbes do for us. So as we've just seen, they help to digest our food by breaking open the cellulose. They make molecules that we can't make ourselves, but we still need. And notable amongst those are some vitamins. There are some B vitamins that bacteria make, and vitamin K, which is really important for blood clotting, but we don't get nearly enough of it from our diet. So luckily, we've got a resident population of microbes that can do it for us. The other thing that is important that microbes do is that they keep our gut healthy. Now, you've seen from the slides before that the lumen of the gut, the inside of the gut, is full of contents. Now, obviously, some of that is food, but an awful lot of that is a mass of bacteria. And the other thing that constitutes dietary fiber is the complex carbohydrates that, again, we can't break down. So it's things like bits of plant cell wall and other components that we and our microbes find difficult to digest. But that's really important, because if you remember that food moves down the gut by a series of muscular contractions, and that's what the enteric nervous system does in part. It stimulates those muscular contractions so that food moves from top to bottom. And as the muscle is contracting, if it were contracting on an empty tube, nothing much would happen. But because the tube is full of fiber, including an awful lot of microbes, that allows digestion to function better, for peristalsis to work better, and for the contents to move through the gut in a healthy way. If you don't have that, for example, some of you may know that if you've had a course of antibiotics, you tend to get constipated. And that's because you've killed off a lot of your gut bacteria. And so your peristalsis isn't working very well. And so you get constipated. So that's a kind of an everyday example of how important our gut bugs are. Another thing that they do is they keep other parts of our body healthy. And notable amongst this is the immune system, because particularly as you're developing as a child, your gut has to, well, we need food, obviously, but food molecules are not part of our human body. And our immune systems need to learn not to attack them, but just to tolerate them. And that's one of the things that the gut bacteria are very good at. They can present food antigens to our immune system so that our immune system learns to tolerate the food. And by and large, that works really well. Some people have food intolerances, and that is when their immune system doesn't recognize the molecule as something to be tolerated and welcomed, but as something that's invading. And that's why some food intolerances develop. So it's important to have a very good, diverse population of bacteria in your gut from the get-go. And actually, during the first few days after birth, there's all manner of colonizations going on inside your gut. You get a lot of your initial gut bacteria from your mother during birth and during the sort of close physical contact that happens between a mother and a baby. And that's important. But also importantly, you get environmental microbes coming in as well. And that ensures that the gut population is diverse and a lot of different species, and they're all doing different things, and we need them all. So on the next slide, what our microbes need from us is, first of all, a hospitable environment at the right temperature and acidity, and that a healthy gut will provide them with that. They need a source of food. Well, we all need a source of food, so that bit's generally taken care of, because as we are feeding ourselves, we're also feeding our microbes. Now, I mentioned a minute ago about diversity. We have a huge number of different species. In fact, we don't know the number. It's in the hundreds of thousands, it is reckoned, of different species, although we don't know them all. That's a bit of a contentious area that we might come back to later on. But they are in competition with each other for space and resources. So really, it's a jungle in there. There's an awful lot of competition going on in our guts between different microbial species. By and large, we're completely unaware of all this. But one of the strategies that the bacteria adopt to try and get around this competition is to build communities so that they all rely on each other, or many of them rely on each other. And that's what this little cartoon does. If you take a foodstuff, which we'll call a substrate, and that's substrate 1, then one kind of bacterium, bacterium 1, can use that and make products which it can use for itself. But some of those products may also act as substrates for other bacteria. So if we have product 1, which is also a substrate for bacterium 2, bacterium 2 can take that product and make its own product from that. So that would be product 2. And that can also act as a substrate for a different sort of bacterium. So we'll say bacterium 3 that can use product 2 or substrate 3 for its own purposes and make product 3, which can be substrate 4 for somebody else. So that's the sort of community network that's going on in our guts. And if it were not for that, we would be less healthy than we are. So that's all quite good to know. And all of this area it's a very hot topic for research. We're only just starting to discover the complexity of all these microbial interactions that are going on. Okay, on the next slide, how can we help our microbes? Well, the first thing, as we've said already, is to eat a balanced diet. That is the crucial thing. Drink plenty of water. Take regular exercise. If we're moving our bodies, that's helping our guts to move as well. And so a healthy body, a healthy, sort of motor body is also helping the gut to be healthy as well. So that's good. And of course, take sensible hygiene precautions. There's a community of microbes in our guts, but that's not to say that they can't be outperformed by other bacteria that might come in. And these are the disease-causing bacteria, the pathogens, who can sometimes actually outcompete the resident bacteria and set up colonies inside us. And that's when we get, for example, food poisoning. For example, the cholera bacterium, which comes from dirty water, basically, that can outcompete an awful lot of our resident bacteria. And of course, that's a horrible disease. You would not want to catch that. So we can minimize the chances of those things happening by, eating and drinking clean food and water, washing our hands at appropriate times, before touching food, after touching food, after going to the toilet, before eating, all the things that, your mother told you about. Just be sensible about it. You don't need to be completely paranoid that every mouthful is going to kill you, because it's not, but beware and just take precautions. Okay, on the next slide, that was the final slide, and I really just wanted to say to you, I hope that has been interesting, and I'm very happy to take any questions, and thank you for listening.
Well done, Hilary. That was really, really interesting. And we actually have loads and loads of questions piling in already. So I hope you're ready.
Do my best.
So first of all, Jenny wants to know, do tea and coffee count as water?
Yes, the quick answer is yes, they do, because you're making them with water, and really the tea and the coffee are just flavorings. I mean, coffee is actually useful in another way, which I think probably we will have a question about that later on. But coffee and a number of other things contain substances called polyphenols, and they are actually quite good for microbes, but that's a different story.
Great. And actually we have OU Health and Wellbeing PRA watching us. So welcome, department.
Hi.
And they would like to know if you think the healthy plate needs to be revamped with larger portions of protein and vegetables, pulses, and less carbohydrates.
This is something that people who are kind of professional nutritionists at in the UK, well, everywhere really, and the World Health Organization are looking at all the time. And the plate that I showed you was the latest version from the World Health Organization. And although it is not set in stone, different countries have got different food cultures. Some places eat an awful lot of fruit and veg and almost no meat. Some people choose to eat that way. The general proportions are still the ones that are recommended. Now, I'm not saying that they are perfect, and they are very likely not perfect for no set of recommendations will be perfect for everybody, but that is the current recommendation, and it is being looked at regularly. I mean, the people at WHO in particular, they've got a whole task force that looks at this sort of thing on a regular basis.
Lovely. And Jenny would also like to know, is it best to drink with or between meals?
I think this comes down to a matter of personal preference. I think if if you get thirsty, you should drink, whether that's with a meal, before a meal, after a meal. The important thing is to listen to your body. And if your body is saying, liquid now, please, then that's when you should be drinking.
Okay, and this is a really interesting question from Pam, and there have been a few people who have followed up with a few comments, but she wants to know if it's wise to remove dental plaque, as in doing so it seems to open up the gums and teeth to sensitivity and infection. And the sort of follow-up comment to that was, I had never thought of plaque as being helpful for digestion before.
Yes, this is I believe is a controversial area amongst dentists and dental hygienists. It is true that when you visit the hygienist, you quite often come away with open wounds, as it were. I don't mean to insult hygienists by that, but certainly it's not uncommon for you to get bleeding gums when somebody's been poking at them. I mean, that makes sense. The thing is that you never do remove all the plaque, so that there are always plaque bacteria remaining. The reason that you would remove plaque is that it can damage your gums. It causes your gums to pull away from the bases of your teeth, and that in itself is a route for infection and gum disease. And so by removing the very large buildup of plaque that you get, or you can get if you don't pay due attention to dental hygiene, you are trying to minimize gum disease. And the thing about gum disease is that if it goes on, you'll lose all your teeth, and then you'll have to have dentures. And in having a lot of open sort of sore bits around your teeth, you are indeed opening yourself up to infection by non-plaque bacteria, or ones that are not conventionally thought of as plaque bacteria. So you can get a disease called bacterial endocarditis, which affects your heart, and that's through a mouth infection, as it were. So it enters your bloodstream from the mouth and goes and attacks your heart, and that's something to avoid. So although you might have transient discomfort at the hygienist with the plaque removal, the alternative is probably worse. I don't know if there's any hygienists out there that want to comment on that, but that's my take on it.
Yeah, feel free to pop a comment in the comment section. I'll definitely read it out loud.
Okay.
So we've had a couple of people ask about Actimel, probiotics, and is it worth it? Should they take it in capsule or liquid? What do you think?
Okay, well, probiotics are a real another contentious area. There is some evidence that if you have something like irritable bowel syndrome, then judicious use of probiotics can be helpful. However, if you are healthy, then the evidence for any usefulness of probiotics is non-existent, actually. There have been a lot of studies about this and meta-studies, and the consensus is that in some very limited cases for a few people, probiotics are worth it. Otherwise, you might just as well spend your money elsewhere. That's not a popular view amongst people who market probiotics, obviously, but if you want to really maximize the support for your gut bacteria, you should really just eat a better diet rather than.
How would you know if you're one of those people that should take a probiotic or not?
I think if you have got the sort of symptoms that a probiotic can address, then you would be under medical care, or you should be under medical care, because irritable bowel syndrome it's a pretty nasty thing to have, and there are various sorts, and probiotics work for some sorts and not so well for other sorts. So this would be something that you wouldn't really want to self-diagnose. You would want to have your GP to advise you on that.
Okay. And Beth has a question. She says opinions on the low food map diet, reducing fermentable carbohydrates for reducing bacterial overgrowth of the small intestine to ease IBS or IBD symptoms. What are your opinions?
Well, I have looked a little bit at this, and the evidence that I've seen doesn't look convincing when it's been done as a sort of a trial. However, I know that anecdotally, some people report that it does help them. So although the science isn't there yet, I'm quite a believer if something works for you when you've got a gut problem, then you should try it, because you know, it's no good my saying, oh well, there isn't any science, so don't do it. There isn't any science, so we need to find out more. And if you have found anecdotally that it works for you, then you know, go for it. It within limits. I mean, it's never a good idea to make drastic changes to your diet or to do anything too dramatic. If you're going to do these things, you should introduce changes over several days or weeks.
Right. I think we will have plenty of questions to see us through the next 20 minutes or so.
Oh, good.
Dane says, I eat raw onions at least one a day, like an apple. Are they good for you?
Yes, yes, onions are good for you. There is all sorts of semi-anecdotal. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence and a few trials that regarding allicin, which is a compound in onions and garlic, and it is supposed to be a stimulant for the immune system. Now, there are a number of molecules like this that are supposed to be, in inverted commas, good for your immune system. Another one of them is ginger. And just very recently, we're starting to be able to unpick the mechanisms for that. I don't know what the mechanism for allicin is, but if you enjoy an onion a day, then go for it, because it's, you know, it is a good thing to do. It's plant material. It has these compounds in it that are probably good for you. So if you like it, do it.
Great. And I think this is a great question, because at one point in time, I think all of us have had to be on antibiotics for something. So after taking antibiotics, what should we do? And what are the other enemies for our gut bacteria?
Well, antibiotics are really the main one. And if you're on very long-term antibiotics, it's likely that your gut flora, so that's all the microbes in your gut, will be subject to being killed by the antibiotics, unless or until they develop resistance. And antibiotic resistance is a huge area, and we can't really address that here today. But if you've been on short-term antibiotics, then, and you want to sort of recover your gut health as soon as you can, then basically you'll find that if you have your balanced diet with plenty of fruit and vegetables, your gut flora will recolonize quite quickly. This is something, I mean, it's the same process as happens when we first develop a gut flora when we're babies. Colonization just sort of happens. And if you eat a diet that contains a lot of different foodstuffs, because even if you're cooking foodstuffs, it's quite likely that if you unless you boil the things to death, certainly something that has got little crevices like broccoli or something like that, you will probably not get rid of all the bacteria on it. And that's a good thing, because we need those bacteria to recolonize us. It will happen pretty much on its own. That would be a time when you might want to boost it along with a probiotic. The problem with probiotics is that there's no guarantee that the bacteria in the probiotics, so this is the sort of the yogurt drinks and that kind of thing, there's very little evidence that those bacteria can actually colonize your gut, because what they have to do is they have to outcompete the resident ones. And by and large, they're not able to do that. Sometimes they can, but that's why you have to take these probiotics every day, because as you swallow your probiotic, it may do some good on the way down, but then it just gets eliminated along with your feces. So the next day you have to have another lot. And of course, if you're a manufacturer of probiotics, this is brilliant, because once you've got somebody who really wants to take the probiotics, they're going to buy it, forever and a day. So I would say they can be useful if you're trying to maybe recolonize or at least help things along a little bit. But by and large, for most healthy people, your gut will sort itself out, as long as you have a good balanced diet with a lot of different foodstuffs. I mean, people say eat the rainbow, and that's actually not a bad rule of thumb. If you eat lots of food of different colors, then you're liable to get lots of fruit, lots of veg, all of the things that you need.
Great. You answered a whole bunch of questions with
Oh,
that,
good.
so well done. Right, so I have YouTube, Facebook. Is it better to eat small portions and more often, or to eat 3 larger meals a day?
Yeah, this is a kind of a cultural thing. I mean, in this country, we tend to eat 3 times a day, and some of us have snacks in between. Generally speaking, it's better not to overload your gut. So huge meals are probably not that great an idea. On the other hand, if you're going to adopt a sort of a grazing feeding pattern where you're having something little all the time, there are a number of things there, because it's difficult to maintain that kind of eating pattern if, for example, you're at work and you need to be in meetings, or you need to be doing things at different times of day. So that's why conventionally we eat in the morning, middle of the day, and evening time. And that's kind of our guts are pretty flexible by and large. They can cope with that sort of thing. They can cope with a grazing lifestyle. The danger with grazing is that you don't really know how much you're shoveling away. And if you're like some people, you'll sit in a meeting and you'll just eat seeds or nuts or something as you're going along. And by the time you've got to the end of the meeting, you may have consumed, a huge amount without really noticing. So I would say that neither is particularly preferable, but it's easier to keep a handle on it if you have discrete meals at particular times of day.
And on a similar topic, what are the benefits of fasting for the gut microbes? Is it something we should be doing?
Yeah, again, this is a contentious issue, and lots of different opinions are around. The gut microbes can speed up or slow down their own rate of growth, depending on how much food is available to them. So if you are fasting, then they will just slow down, and they won't. Some of them will die, but most of them won't. And the ones that die can be broken down and used by others. So they can actually sustain themselves quite well over a period of fasting. Now, there are people who think that you should be fasting twice a week or something like that. And the reason for that is a bit more complicated than just the microbes. The reason for that is that by fasting, you are putting your body into a state of nutritional stress. So basically, you're doing a short starvation. And when you do that, your body's metabolism switches to use the fat and the carbohydrates that you've got stored. So it's a good way of actually mobilizing all your stores and making sure that you don't accumulate too many of them, because many of us really are a bit overweight, if not grossly overweight. And it's reckoned that if you can make your body mobilize its fat stores by starving, then that's a good way to manage your weight. It doesn't work for everybody. Some people find that having a day without food is murder, and they simply won't do it. And of course, a lot of weight control is about willpower. Actually, you've got to want to lose weight, otherwise you'll just give in every time to that cupcake or whatever. So fasting, unless it's for really long periods when your microbes will die, it doesn't really affect the microbes too much.
Lovely. So are milk alternatives such as almond or coconut milk better, assuming you are not intolerant to milk? There is debate as to whether we should still drink milk.
Yes, and that's wrapped up in this whole business of using animals less for food in all respects. I mean, there's fairly convincing evidence that too much red meat is bad for you. And so many people are cutting down on their red meat intake because it's been shown to be associated with cancers and various other things that you don't really want. Milk is an interesting thing because in a way it's a byproduct of animals. It's not the whole reason that we would eat an animal. We as mammals, we all drink milk when we're babies. That's the complete food. It's perfect for babies. Human milk is the best possible milk for humans. Cow milk is the best possible food for cows. And since we are not cows, cow milk is actually less than ideal for us, but it's nice. It's good for, you know, it is good for you. The proportions of various nutrients may not be ideal for an adult European, but they are, you know, the components are still good for you. The animal-derived products contain different chemicals from, say, almond milk or soy milk. I think there is nothing that can't be replaced, but I think it's really down to personal preference. I have semi-skimmed milk, cow milk, because I don't like the taste of almond milk or soy milk. And I think for a lot of people that's the thing that you're deciding on, whether you like the taste of it or not. And you know, food should be a pleasurable thing. We enjoy eating, most of us, and to kind of, in a way, torture yourself by eating something that you don't actually like very much just because you think it's good for you. It's you know, some people will like it and some people prefer almond milk, for example, but I personally don't, and I think it's a personal preference thing.
Lovely. Right, Gillian's got two really good thought-provoking questions here. So there's growing research into changing your microbes to target various health concerns, such as obesity, epilepsy, depression, and more. What's your view on this area?
Yeah, this is a very young area of research. There is quite a lot of emerging evidence that your gut microbiota, your gut microbes, can affect your emotional state. And the mechanism for this is thought to be via the vagus nerve, which is a very important nerve that comes out of your brain and basically supplies or makes contact with all sorts of areas in your gut and elsewhere, but a lot of gut stuff happens via the vagus nerve. And there is some emerging evidence. Much of it is from animal studies. So although you can be very scientific about them, they may not be 100% relevant to humans. That the gut can affect your emotions and your mental state. There is quite a bit of evidence now that it can affect your gut microbiome, can affect depression, anxiety, those sorts of negative things. The other part of the question was to do with how can you change your gut microbiome, and that's very difficult, actually. There are various ways of changing or adapting or slightly nudging your gut microbiome into a different profile, among which most notoriously is fecal matter transplantation. But as I said before, any kind of attempt to change your gut microbiome sort of artificially, it's a bit of an uphill struggle because you have to overcome the resident population. So there is quite a bit of there are quite a number of tests of experiments where people have ingested various new combinations of microbes and you've monitored the gut composition, before and after. And there are changes can be recorded, but they tend to be transient changes. And so if you go back to some of these people, maybe a year later, you'll find they've gone back to where they were before. So although you can sometimes make changes to the gut microbiome, you can't reliably do it on a long-term basis. I hope that answered that question.
I think it did. It certainly gives people a lot to think about. And the other question that Gillian asked, I thought was really interesting is, could you tell us a bit about your take on how microbes do or don't affect the gut-brain axis, which I think you touched a bit on there too.
Yes, I mean, I think it's a little bit dangerous at the moment to be quite hard and fast about it. We know that there are major links, like via the vagus nerve between the gut and the brain. And so it's not unreasonable to think that there is a real physiological and emotional connection there. And indeed, I mean, that's reflected in common practice. I mean, you talk about butterflies in your stomach and that sort of thing. And that's all to do with your feelings of anticipation or anxiety or worry or trepidation. And you get these butterflies in your stomach. And that's a kind of a two-way thing between your brain and your gut. And that's reasonably well documented now. However, there is a lot of extrapolation going on between mechanisms that are being investigated, and I won't say they're completely nailed yet, but they're under investigation in animal models. But it's very, very difficult to translate animal sort of emotions and behavior into human emotions and behavior. Now, we may think we know when an animal is worried or frightened or happy or whatever, and pet owners the world over will tell you that they know when their dog or their cat is happy or hungry or wants to go out or whatever it is, and that's certainly true. We can read their emotions, but that's a very different story from having a bunch of lab animals, mice, which most of us, some people keep mice as pets and perhaps they get to know them really well, I don't know. But by and large, what happens with laboratory animals in that sort of area is not readily translatable into humans. So my view is, let's wait and see. When the mechanisms have been completely sorted out in animals, let's then see if similar mechanisms exist in humans. And only then will we be confident in saying, yes, if we do this, then that happens.
Right, I think we've got time for about 2 more questions, and I've seen it pop up a few times in the comments on Facebook. So people would like to know if kombucha is effective. Hopefully I pronounced that right.
Again, I don't know the answer to this one. It certainly anecdotally, there are people who swear by it and who seem to have, very good results from eating it. I don't think there have been that many scientific studies on it. There have been some, but until the evidence is a bit stronger, I wouldn't want to commit myself to recommending it or not recommending it.
Fair enough. And then the last question, I think this is a great one to end on. Daniela would like to know, does your ethnicity have any bearing on your microbes or bacteria?
Your ethnicity per se probably doesn't. I think it's very much more dependent on your geography and the kind of food culture that you live in. So if you look at people like hunter-gatherers who have seasonal differences in the food that they eat because they're following either animals or they're harvesting berries or whatever, at different seasons, their microbiome is quite different. And that's to do with their lifestyle and the geography rather than their ethnicity. And I think the fact that if you transplant, that's not the right word, if you move populations, they will start to get the diseases of the population that they're living in rather than the diseases of their heritage. So there's been a lot of work on Japanese people living in the United States. Now, traditionally, the Japanese will eat a lot of fish and fish products. That's less common in the United States. And so their gut microbiomes come to resemble those of their adopted country rather than those of Japan. And so I don't think ethnicity as such has much bearing on it. It may have a little bit of bearing, but very much more important is what you're eating and the culture that you're in.
Lovely. Right. Well, it's just a couple minutes before 1, but I don't think we could possibly get to all the questions that have come through today. So I would just say a very big thank you to everybody watching. If you really would like your question answered, you can email us at stem-news@open.ac.uk. I will pop that in a chat in just a minute, and I'll get them over to Hilary to answer. And I would be remiss if I also didn't plug the free course that Hilary wrote on OpenLearn. So if you just Google OpenLearn and the science of nutrition, you will find her free course, but I will also pop a link to that in the comments very shortly. So a big thank you from me and a big thank you from Hilary for watching, everybody, and enjoy